So let's have a look then at today's headlines in the global media. We begin with the Financial Times. It points out the clock's ticking on Brexit. Its headline says Johnson picks hardcore cabinet to meet 99 days Brexit deadline. Then on to the Times, which says Johnson installs hardline Brexiteers after cabinet purge. It suggests the Irish political leadership will stand by the withdrawal deal drawn up by the European Union. That's the Irish Times front page. Now in Germany, their paper, Frankfurter Allgemeine, it looks at Europe's prospects as Prime Minister Johnson threatens the EU and to leave the EU with no deal. Then on to the Daily Mirror, and it looks at Boriss's quip in his audience with the Queen, calling it another Boriss gaffe. This is what the paper says. It says he told the Queen, "I don't know why anyone would want this job," when he was there to be appointed as Prime Minister. Now, moving on to other stories, the Times outlines why Facebook has to pay $5 billion in fines in what it calls a privacy deal with US authorities. And as the UK and many other countries prepare for the hottest day, the heat wave in Europe continues. BBC's weather experts say extraordinary temperatures could break records across the continent. The website also has lots of tips on how to cope, how to sleep at night. Or in the case of many of my colleagues, they have to sleep in the day, which is very difficult. Cornelia is back as promised, Cornelia. So let's get stuck in. Lots of stories today we're looking at concerning the new Prime Minister. So the Financial Times looks at the deadline, 99 days to meet the Brexit deadline, and it talks about his defiant, brutal speech, the fact that he's ripped apart Theresa May's cabinet. Lots of very strong languge in this report.
Yeah, very strong. I think the Financial Times looks at it with a business perspective. So they're obviously worried about a hard Brexit or a no-deal Brexit and what it would do to the economy. They're comparing, you know, this Knight of Long Knives to Harold Macmillan in 1962, who had an equally brutal reshuffle. Not quite as brutal, but quite as brutal. But you know, Harold Macmillan didn't last very long after the reshuffle. And, you know, when you they looked at all the incoming people are all, most of whom are staunch Brexiteers, except for Sajid Javid, who initially was not a Brexiteer. And then, you know, but then when you look at Brexit, I think Sir Keir Starmer, the Brexit Secretary of Labour, you know, the shadow Brexit Secretary of Her Majesty's opposition, said yesterday, and he had a point there, at some stage Boris's aspirations will meet with reality, because the Europeans clearly don't think that the withdrawal agreement is open for renegotiation to the degree that he thinks that it is.
And the article points out that many Conservative MPs believe that the reality could be an early general election,
and I think
he's heading for that, towards that, and he's gathering a team of campaigners.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dominic Cummings, who was the mastermind behind the Vote Leave campaign, who's a very, very brilliant strategist, would suggest that. Also, his speech going in would suggest that when he talked about 20,000 more policemen on the street, we need to do something against the care crisis. We have an aging population. That was very much, other than the Brexit side, it was very much a campaign speech.
Your word, very quickly before we move on Sajid Javid as the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, a former banker. Your thoughts?
I think it's I think he will probably do a very fine job. He is not a fan of austerity, so we will see some loosening of the purse strings. So I think it's great,
especially with the general election around the corner.
Exactly, and I obviously also think it's great that we have somebody, you know, who is of Pakistani descent, who is the son of an immigrant himself. That somebody like that can become finance, the finance minister. That should give every child out there who is from a minority background hope.
Good point. Let's now move on to the Irish Times front page. Of course, they've got Johnson all over it. They've also got Ireland must be prepared for the extreme heat, which most European papers and media is talking about that as well. But
I love it.
We want to point out this one particular paragraph. I mean, most of it discusses the cabinet, the changes which we've already looked at.
But it's that one paragraph where the Taoiseach says, Leo Varadkar says, the Irish Prime Minister says, look, I'm looking forward to meeting Boriss and talking to him in detail, because his speech again long on rah, very short on detail, and basically the backstop will have to stay in place and the withdrawal agreement will have to stay in place.
And that's always been the line from Leo Varadkar, the Prime Minister of Ireland, and also some of the leaders within Europe itself,
absolutely.
And Brussels. But this is the issue, because that was the one issue, the Irish backstop, that when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary and there was that famous meeting in Chequers when they were trying to nail down the detail of the withdrawal agreement, he just walked away.
Yeah, he walked away. But you see, that's very interesting, because I understand from a keeping the peace in Northern Ireland, why the border needs to be kept open. I also understand the EU. They cannot have, if the UK wants to leave the common market, you can't have it bleeding into an open border. So the backstop does make sense.
Frankfurt Allgemeine, they're one of their main dailies in Germany, of course, looking at this story very closely indeed. And it is quite a hard article talking about Johnson and the fact that he wants this deadline of October the 31st to be met regardless. Deal or no deal, do or die, that line, etc. That they're focusing very much on that.
They're focusing very much on that, and they start off. They obviously also focus on the 39 billion, because Boriss said, oh, we'll just keep back the 39 billion, and in good German fashion, they say, well, that's really a big concern for them. They're like, we have a deal, and the UK now needs to pay the divorce payment.
£39 billion that was a part of the withdrawal agreement, that the UK would pay that.
And I think that's their main concern. And they basically say, well, how is he going to get to a negotiated deal in 99 days? And it looks like a no-deal Brexit.
Let's look at Boriss one more time. Daily Mirror front page. It points out, it's got the photograph of that moment where he met with the Queen. He had an audience with the Queen, who, when she formally asked him to put together a new government, he says, I don't know why anyone would want the job.
It's the Queen who said that. He actually leaked, which is an absolute no-no. He leaked what the Queen said, and here it says he broke protocol when he said she told him, the Queen. I don't know why anybody would want the job. She may have a point. But, when you look at this whole, what unfolded, it was a titanic shift in terms. The establishment have just become the backbenchers, and the backbenchers have become the establishment.
Facebook, really quickly, big fine, and we were expecting that to come. They were expecting it. They probably had the money tucked away to one side, $5 billion. It's a pretty hefty sum of money, but for Facebook, making as much as it is on a monthly basis.
When you have a $15 billion free cash flow, these five, per quarter, these $5 billion don't really matter. But I think your previous guest made a very good point, saying, well, this doesn't matter, but if they do this, if they look at antitrust and they curb the way in which Facebook can do business, that will be a problem, because they will have to reinvent themselves. And obviously with Libra, they have met some hurdles.
They have indeed. And your thoughts on the outlook for Facebook? Because, of course, today we're talking about their stellar earnings, but they are being challenged on every side when it comes to regulators looking at every single aspect of their business.
And it's not just the regulation; it's also the taxation. Let's not forget the Europeans and the G7 finance ministers were very, very clear that these big tech companies should start paying the taxes where they earn them, because they put a lot of to Ireland, for instance, a lot of as headquarters where they don't have to pay much tax. So they will be, when you're too successful, people will gun for you.
Now, I have tweeted this story this morning. It's on BBC Online. Hot weather, how to sleep in a heat
I
wave.
have the solution.
It's got Cornelia's got a solution. It's got its top 10 tips. No napping is the top tip of all. I tell you what, I can't stick to that one. I always have a nap every day. Chill your socks, number 5. Put your socks in the freezer and then pop them on.
The much better solution.
Go on then, what's yours?
Come and do the early morning newspaper review. You don't get to sleep because you have to be in the news flow. It's the solution.
So you don't
Done.
sleep at all. How much sleep do you get a night? Just out of interest. On a normal day.
Between 3 and 5 hours.
So you're a little bit like Margaret Thatcher. She only had 4 hours a night.
Yeah,
apparently.
I'm a clinical insomniac.
Well, let's hear from some of our viewers who've sent us their opinions and views. We've got Eddie Dillon who says, "We've fitted these in our bedroom ceilings, so they've got fans in the ceilings, which are remote controlled. Bliss. Drink water, avoid alcohol in the evening, avoid eating anything heavy." I would agree with that advice. We have others who've said that they've got fans. Mr. Celtic, or Celtic even, says frozen gel packs are much more efficient at cooling you down if you apply them to your pulse points, wrists or neck.
That makes sense.
Lots of practical solutions.
Yeah. Interesting.
Thank you very much, Cornelia. Thanks for
you.
your time.